All right. Great. Let's get started. Welcome to Chaotic Success, the Overthinker's Guide to More Peaceful Career Transitions. If you are an overthinker like me, we're going to get some expert tips today on curbing indecision, redirecting that rumination, and moving ourselves forward with some confidence and some clarity. We're going to give people a couple more seconds here as we go through some of the general notes about the webinar. This content is being recorded and will be available to participants following the event. We will be taking and looking at questions at the end of the session. So please feel free to use the chat function, the Q&A or the chat function to ask any questions, and we will address those at the end of the conversation. Great, let's get started. We all know it's an interesting time in the employment market. There's a significant shift in power from the employer to you all, the talent. It's a great time to utilize that shift to reset the thought process a little bit too, right? If the employers are understanding that the talent is more valuable, it's the right time to revalue your own skills and expertise and present that value into that marketplace. So we're going to offer some tips on how to stop overthinking your resume, the interview, and that negotiation, so we don't miss any opportunities in this power shift within the employment market. I'm Joshua Slyman, Director of Product Strategy for Scribble Solutions, where we create software to promote talented people doing good work. I'd like to introduce my guest, my colleague, a personal mentor and friend, Gary Stine. Gary is a certified transformative coach who, over 25 years of experience, has been helping people and corporations increase performance and results and decrease stress. His clients report enjoying a completely different experience of life with less overthinking, indecision, and confusion, more calm, clarity, and improved results. This is accomplished by helping clients to see how their minds were designed to work, which tends to be at odds with how we've been trained to use our minds. He loves doing this work and never plans to retire. You can always find more about Gary at his website, GaryStine.com. Gary, hello, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Josh. And I'm just going to spell that name because people get confused. It's GaryStine.com.
Great. Thank you so much. That's perfect. And please check out Gary's website. He has a wealth of resources and expertise there as well. All right, we're excited to get started. Again, thank you for spending some time with us today. We really hope it allows you to identify some ways to calm your mind, focus your unique value, and direct that into the employment workplace. Gary, this seems to be a good place to start to tap on your expertise. Maybe you could give a little bit of a definition around overthinking, some words on who might consider themselves an overthinker.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it includes most of us, but I just have an analogy to use for a second. You probably all remember being a kid and running too fast, faster than your legs would carry you. You get to a point where you're going really fast, and you have to acknowledge that, wait a minute, I can't keep going this fast because I'm gonna fall on my face.
Yeah.
I actually did that a few years ago when I was playing tennis. And
I've done it skateboarding a few times.
Well, I think everybody's done it, but most all of us are overthinkers, and very few of us realize that because we're so used to overthinking. If we're going to talk about optimal performance, and of course, when you go to an interview, you really want to be at your highest performance. Essentially, the formula is potential minus distraction. Now, we tend to think of distraction as things that are going on around us, but we distract ourselves horribly by overthinking everything.
Absolutely.
It's in our culture, it's sort of, well, if a little thinking's good, a lot of thinking must be a lot better. But what tends to happen is when you get to a certain point, you start to overthink something, all you're going to do is be confused.
Right.
You're going to lose any clarity you had. Decisions are going to be much harder than they need to be, simply because you're thinking about it too much.
Right.
Uh, and it tends to be the more important something seems to us, the more we tend to overthink it. So a job interview is a perfect candidate for overthinking.
Yeah.
We can just drive ourselves crazy. There was a word you had on that last slide that I was going to borrow. Can you just go back to that for 1 second? The struggle. We make it into a struggle. It's not a struggle. It's going to meet somebody and connecting with them as a human being. That's what a job interview is really about.
Right.
And that tends to be the thing we sort of leave till last. We're worrying about the right thing to say and making sure that our resume looks right. And we're dealing with all this sort of ancillary stuff and forgetting that what an interview really is two people getting to know one another.
Right.
And the interviewer wants to look at you and think, is this somebody I might want to work with? Is this somebody I can see spending the day with? Even if they're not going to be directly working with you, that's sort of the question in their mind. And if you've ever interviewed yourself, or been the interviewer, I mean, and a lot of you have, I'm sure, you'll see what I mean. When you're doing the interviewing, you just want to have a connection with somebody.
Right.
That connection's already there. It already exists. All you have to do is grab it. It's just waiting for you. You don't have to do anything to make that connection. So I think that's a really important point. The other thing I just want to say about this is we tend to focus way too much on a particular outcome that we would like to have. So when we go to a job interview, it's all about, will I get this job? Will they make an offer, or will they pass me on to the next level of interviews? That's the worst possible position to be in terms of undermining what you are doing. The attitude going into any kind of a job interview has to be, I'm going to show them the best I have. I hope they like it. I hope it's a match. And if it's not, that's fine. I'll go on to the next interview. That's something I had to learn many, many years ago when I was an actor, and I was always running out to auditions, and I was hoping they'd like me. And it was all about, do you like me? Is this good enough? Do you like me? And the the audition was always over before I even started my prepared piece or acting was scene or whatever it was, because they could see that I wanted it too much. That scares people off. It scares anybody off. It's like being too needy in a relationship. You just want to get away from it. So this is not life and death. This is just one more opportunity to see if this is a good fit. You might want to work there, and you might be able to bring your value to that place in a way that really makes you happy and makes that company happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the point about it, as something becomes more important or more or relevant or significant in your life, the ability to or the default answer to overthink or to bring too much thought to it really does bring those things to the surface. And I think that's a really great point and very insightful.
And it's all done innocently, because we start to prepare for an interview and we think, I really want to do a good job with this. I'm really going to be prepared. You're probably prepared a long time before you think you are. But what tends to happen is we start to think about something and we think, well, let's see, I'm throwing a little bit of thought at that, and that's good. So I'll just throw a lot more thinking at it, and that'll be even better. But it never is. That's when you start to get confused. You lose perspective. And then it's all about you and the job, instead of just, here's an opportunity to see if we like each other, see if we fit.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Understanding the impact. Like, I know personally, overthinking can sort of seep through your life. It can taint your view right on particular things. It colors us with some doubt and some complications. I know, Gary, you've had a lot of experience with professionals, with executives. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the impacts that you've seen on people in that career journey, as far as overthinking and giving something too much attention.
Oh, sure. Um, I see this at every level I work, and I tend to work at fairly high levels. It's amazing that I see C-level people just driving themselves crazy with their thinking. And I think, gee, this person's really, really smart, really capable, highly accomplished, and they're sabotaging themselves. It overthinking, one of the things it makes you do is question everything you come up with.
Hmm.
And of course, you start to question yourself. You had some questions up earlier. We don't need to see them again, but am I qualified enough? Do I have, is this a good fit? Will they like, is my resume full enough? It's all that stuff about sort of people pleasing that can really get in the way. Somebody who's interviewing you, they don't want to be pleased. They want to see who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard because while we certainly want to meet expectations, we can never really have a full grasp on what somebody's expectations are, especially
No,
if we haven't
no.
met them, right? Um, so
We're guessing.
overthinking,
You're right.
yeah, exactly, and it's exhausting, right? Like it is exhausting to think out every potential option, everything that might happen, and try to be in front of it.
Yeah.
And it sets us up to trigger those own things in the situation.
Yeah. And I just want to say one thing about overthinking. I still find myself doing it at times. And I'm a little surprised, but I shouldn't be. It's a very human thing. But this is not about getting over overthinking or going beyond it. It's only about recognizing when you are overthinking so that you can just let it drop, let
Right.
it stop.
Yeah.
The expression, I've got to let go of this or that, I've got to let go of this thought. Well, if you never grab onto it to begin with, then there's nothing to let go of.
Mm.
It just passes, and the next thought in the queue in your head comes up. That's the way our minds were designed to work. One thought replaces another. When a thought scares us or gets us a little bit upset, we grab onto it and we try to protect ourselves from it. And by doing that, all we're doing is locking that thought in place. We
Mhm.
lock that thought in place and we're locking a very bad feeling in place, because how you feel at any given moment is a function of your thinking in that particular moment. So
Yeah.
if you're overthinking, you're not going to feel great. It feels lousy in your body.
And this reminds me of actually the sort of the beginning of our friendship and relationship, because I came to you ultimately when I was transitioning a career, right? And suddenly I had to meet different expectations and understanding, and suddenly there was a public speaking part of my job, and a lot more visibility within the organization. And I was concerned. I wasn't sure I had the confidence to take this project on. And in the very early days of working together, that's where you started, right? You started on building my confidence and helping to show the things that were sapping that confidence, and giving me some tools and frameworks in order to sort of reposition that drain, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll just say one quick thing about that. I remember meeting you and thinking, nothing wrong here, just going a little too fast. Just going a little too fast. Because that's what overthinking is. It's simply you going faster than your mind will carry you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And it's funny because I remember you at the beginning of our engagement very clearly. And you were convinced that you had to build up your confidence. And I was under the impression, and I still am with you and everybody I've ever worked with, the confidence is already there. You don't need to be familiar with it. It doesn't need to feel like, oh yeah, I know exactly where to go for this. It's already there. Self-confidence doesn't come from the self, because the self is only a collection of ideas about yourself. That's all it is. So if you just let that relax and focus on the task at hand, which is talking about what's important to you, what's meaningful to you, what you're proud of having done, what you want to accomplish in the future, that takes, in a strange way, it takes you out of the equation. You're too busy being engaged with somebody to think about yourself. And this is something I discovered many, many years ago, and I've told it to every client I've ever had. The more you're thinking about yourself, the less like yourself you really are. The less you're thinking about yourself, the more like yourself you really are. Because as soon as you start thinking about yourself and questioning yourself and overthinking, it crowds everything else out. That's all that your brain has room for.
Right. So how do we cut through it all? How do we start to focus on things we can move? I know you started to sort of break on or started to talk about it a little bit there in terms of resetting, defining yourself, resetting expectations, and really starting to look at those outcomes and understanding what's a win, right? Like if you know what is a strength, what is something that is an arrow in your quiver, right? Then it's just a question of understanding how you use that arrow.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm going to talk about that for just a second because most of us are really bad at appreciating the things we're really good at. We tend to devalue them and think, well, anybody can do that. And I have a quick little story that I've told for years about that. When I was an actor, and I'm going back, more than 30 years, um, I had a friend who was also an actor, and he was a singer, and probably the best singer I've ever heard. Did a lot of work on Broadway, a voice that would make you think you were hearing the angels sing. But he didn't think it was a big deal. At that As we started to be friends, he came to see me in a Shakespeare play. He wasn't trained for that. He wasn't a classically trained actor, and it seemed like a big deal to him. And he said, how were you able to speak that language and bring it to life like that?" And my reaction was sort of, well, anybody can do that. But of course, and with training, they can. But if you haven't had that specific training, you can't. And I'd say to him, you sing like an angel. How did you accomplish that? And even though he knew his voice was exceptional because he was told that all the time, his reaction was sort of, well, anybody can do that. So we take these things that we're really good at and we tend to bury them because we don't realize that in other people's mind, this is a very big deal.
Right. Yeah, I think that's actually one of the things that one of the most important things I came out of our relationship together with. Not that we're out of it, but was the ability to pinpoint sort of a unique strength, which for me is making connections and building bridges. It's very much where the basis of my work lies, and once I was able to understand that that was sort of my core value, that I bring to an organization, it was much more comfortable, much easier to be comfortable in that understanding. And it's almost like it cuts both ways because that making of connections is largely driven by the same um, thought process as overthinking, which is putting things together to see if they fit or not, but it's for a beneficial purpose versus um, a theoretical harmful purpose internally. And so I think one of the things that's important is that this actually can be leveraged positively.
Yeah, yeah, it really can. It really can.
The other thing that you really helped me identify was that there are certain internal personal metrics that represent a success, and if you know what those are and you don't take on too many, then it's much easier to know when you win. You see those successes because they're sort of outlined on the plan a little bit, or at least loosely defined, so you know when you get there.
Yeah, good. I just want to talk about one word on your slide here, Josh, which is goals. Um, I've worked an awful lot with goals, and what I've discovered is that most people come up with what I call in order to goals. In other words, I want to accomplish this, and in order to do that, I have to do this. And that kind of a goal can seem overwhelming and intimidating. The kind of goals you want are goals that inspire you, because those goals are fun to go for. When you load it up and think, oh, I've got to have this, got to be this way, got to be this way, then it's just a lot of heavy slogging. It's
Right.
hard work, and that's all it is. But if you have inspiring goals, it's, oh, wow, I get to work on that again today. Wonderful. Let's go.
Absolutely. And I know one of the things that that you put a lot of emphasis on as well is, is this idea of the a relaxed mind, a peaceful mind, and using the way the mind was intended. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I want to, because when a lot of people hear that, their automatic thought is, oh, well, might be true of them, but it's not true of me. My mind's always going too fast. But the truth is, that's just a learned behavior, that mind going too fast and overthinking. The human mind, and when I say it that way, I'm including you, whoever you are, the human mind was designed to slow down when we stop throwing logs on the fire. It always reminds me of an old time locomotive where the engineer or the other guy in the engine had to be throwing logs or coal on the fire all the time, throwing it on, throwing it on. Well, a mind that's working too hard and overthinking is like that guy throwing logs on the fire. If you want it to cool off, all you have to do is stop throwing logs on the fire. In other words, stop taking that thinking too seriously, because that's what we all do. Here's the problem we have as humans. Our entire experience of life comes through thought. It doesn't seem like it. It seems like we're reacting to the world out here, and it's like we're a camera taking it all in. But that's not the truth of it. And I'm afraid physics are on my side on this one, because the human mind is not wired to feel anything outside of its own thinking. So we'll talk about, oh, she drives me crazy, or this situation is driving me nuts. It's not the situation or the person. It's the thinking you have about it. And a good way to illustrate that is, think about somebody on a commute in the morning. They're driving their car. They do the same commute every morning. Some mornings it goes really, really well. Some mornings it goes really badly.
I know that for true.
And on the other hand, some days it will be going very badly and it doesn't seem to bother you, because you're in a high enough state of mind that you're able to just let it go, let it pass by. And some days you're in a low state of mind, and the same exact drive you had yesterday with the same person cutting you off and missing the same red lights, it's going to seem much, much worse if you're in a low state of mind. So it's really important to recognize that being driven crazy is coming from your own thinking. It can't come from anywhere else.
I mean, that's quite empowering, right? Like it really does give you back a lot more control in your day to day. Obviously, there are things that are outside of our control, right? So part of controlling that overthinking is helping to identify what is doable and what isn't. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go. But
yeah, and if I could just jump in and add something,
please.
It's also incredibly helpful to realize when you're overthinking, because that takes you out of that swirl almost instantly. Oh, wait a minute, I'm just overthinking now. That's all that's going on. Mm-hmm. Now, the way I'm talking to you about this, it all makes sense. I hope it makes sense. It makes sense to me anyway. But this is something you have to start to see for yourself.
Right.
And the only way you can see it for yourself is to be continually exposed to this sort of philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Which I think brings us to a great point, which is it's all about perspective, right?
Yeah. When you're overthinking something, it's impossible to have the big picture.
Right. Exactly. And
looking at the trees here, you can't see the trees for the forest. When you catch yourself and notice that you're overthinking, essentially it's like a giant has grabbed you by the back of the neck in the forest and lifted you up like this to above the tree line, and all of a sudden you can see everything. All of a sudden the big picture is much clearer because you've been taken out of yourself just a little bit.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the things, and it sort of ties back to sort of the mechanism behind overthinking is, we get focused on the details and we lose the big picture. But if we understand that we have to step back and look at the big picture, or focus on the big picture while still attending to the most important details, then uh, we actually have sort of the ability to come in and out and to see both the trees and the forest.
Yeah, and that's when you're really in good shape.
Right.
You know, you can see what's close, you can see what's far. Uh, you have to be able to do both.
Right.
If you don't, you're going to be in a trap that you've, as I said, unknowingly created for yourself.
Right. And overthinking is very much getting stuck in the details, in not being able to get beyond the things that you may or may not be able to impact.
Yeah, it sure is. It
Yeah.
sure is.
The other thing I like here is this idea of being flexible and being fair, and I think this is directed at yourself, right, Gary? Like we need to be flexible and fair with ourselves in our execution of um, uh, uh, you know uh, in wrangling overthinking, but also leveraging it to the degree possible.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I couldn't have said it better. We've got to be a little easier with ourselves than we tend to be. We think we're really accomplishing something when we're beating the crap out of ourselves. No,
Right.
we're not. All we're doing is beating the crap out of ourselves.
And when we're beating the crap out of ourselves, we're not doing the last thing here, which is acknowledging the actual wins, right?
Yeah,
We're so caught up
yeah.
in making sure that that we've been reprimanded for the quote unquote mistakes or potentials, that we gloss over the daily wins that we get that ultimately stack on top of each other to create that big picture.
That's absolutely true. And one of the here's a good example of not acknowledging your win. Let's say you went to a job interview and you felt you did a really good job. You made a great connection with the person. It was an easy exchange. You got the impression that you liked each other. You gave a really good representation of yourself and your strengths. And then something happens, and that's as far as the interview process goes, and you don't hear from them again. It's still a win if you were able to come into that situation, make that connection or claim that connection, and give a good account of yourself. That's a win. The fact is, most people do everything they can to avoid job interviews. And if they've been in a job for a while and then have to interview, it's kind of a freak out. "Oh, I got to go out and do that again." Oh, I encourage people to go on job interviews whenever they can, just to keep their currency in the world up to date.
Mhm.
Also, when you're doing it all the time, it's much less intimidating because you see it for what it is. As I said earlier, two people sitting and getting to know each other.
I think that's exactly right, and it brings up an interesting point for me too. Is if the more often you do it, the more experience you have with good and bad experiences, and therefore the more likely you are to find a positive employment experience and identify it from that interview experience, because you'll start to see the trends on what looks and feels like a good match for you.
Yeah, right. That's great. Yeah.
All right, step 5. We got to let things go once in a while, huh?
Yeah.
I think that's definitely, what we can actually control. This is sort of back to that to the previous conversation. It's a great filter to use when prioritizing what you can actually intentfully impact.
Yeah.
If it's something outside of your control, we probably shouldn't be putting too much time and attention on it.
We shouldn't be putting any time and attention on it. There's no point. You know, it's like trying to push a 5,000 pound car. You're probably not going to be able to do it by yourself.
Right.
You know, you just can't change that. So leave the car where it is for now until you can get help or until get the thing running or whatever the problem is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, when you say empty the trash can too, um, it's funny because we all have kind of a reset button. That reset button is simply acknowledging, wait a minute, I'm just going way too fast right now. I've got to step away for a second and just let myself slow down. Because as I said, if you let yourself, you will slow down. The human mind was designed to do that. But you have to get in the habit of being able to just let it drop and leave it where it lays.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that I, in terms of quote unquote emptying the trash cans is, um, and if we can acknowledge our wins, back to the previous slide, then we're actually showing completion of particular products, projects, initiatives, whatever that is, um, which means we can check them off the list and sort of remove that from the list of mental consideration that needs to be done.
Yeah, yeah. And, it's funny because we all think we can do a lot of things at once. No, we can't. Not well. I mean, women are better than men because they biologically, you know, their radar is much better. They've got to be looking out for their kids and stuff. And so they're used to juggling a lot of things at the same time. But most of us can't really work on a lot of things at the same time. It can feel, oh, I'm working really hard here. I'm really getting a lot done. But it's sort of like worrying.
Mhm.
When you start worrying, it feels like you're really accomplishing something. I'm working, boy, I am worrying the hell out of this. I'm really getting some. No, you're not.
You
You're
just
chasing your
nailed
own tail.
a family trait for for some people I know for sure, which is, that the best way to look busy is to make sure you have a list of problems.
Yeah, right, right. And I'm glad you said problems because when you're overthinking, you're essentially treating your mind as a problem solving machine. That's one thing the human mind can do, but that's not all it can do. And that's not where it's at its most powerful either. It's much more powerful when the human mind is a little quiet because then your intuitive knowledge comes to the fore. Then you can hear it. If your mind's going too fast, you can't hear that intuitive knowledge. And if intuitive knowledge is a term that sticks in your craw, let's just say instincts. Everybody in business admires people with good instincts. Wow, they've trusted that and they knew when to act on it. You know, those instincts get lost with overthinking. There's just
Right.
too much noise.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. It's distortion. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? It's putting too much information into the processing system.
yeah. It's a blivet. A blivet is 10 pounds of stuff in a 5 pound bag.
Perfect. Love it.
I had to pick my word carefully there. 10 pounds of stuff in that 5 pound bag. It didn't work.
You nailed it. You nailed it. All right. So, what does it mean to be value forward? I think, and this sort of goes back to what I was saying earlier about identifying, that core value that you as an individual bring to the table. You really need to wrap your hands around that so that you can lead comfortably with your individualism.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's absolutely true. And it can be a little hard for us to grab onto what are my unique talents? What's my individual value here? It can be a little hard to do that. And it can also be discouraging because all of a sudden, as I was saying earlier, you'll look at something you're really good at and sort of devalue it. Think, well, that's no big deal. Anybody can do that.
Right.
No, they can't. If they could, they would. And they're
Right.
not doing it. You are.
Right. Yeah, and I just want to sort of circle back to this point because you hit on it earlier, which is like, if something is easy for you, that's a good indicator that it may be a piece of or part of your unique strength. Because to the point, right, you would look at your friend and you both thought the other had the actual skill, but the truth was it was just that neither of you could do what the other one could do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well put.
Yeah, no, I think that's really really an important point, because it allows you to the point of the slide, um, really radiate your unique value. The combination of your skills, the path that you took, experience, which was completely different than anybody else's. You have a list of interests that is not the same as anyone else. Um, one of the things that I've always thought should be more involved with the employment search is sexual interests, right? If unique value is around making connections, and you are interested in, say, skateboarding, right? Working for an organization that is in that industry only makes it that much more valuable to my day to day. So obviously, interviewing ripe for overthought. um, I think it's one of the biggest fears that people have in in the employment journey, so to speak. Maybe we can talk through some ways to leverage some of that confidence and understanding that we're starting to define,
Yeah.
um, in terms of the interview.
Yeah. Uh, this is a place where overthinking will kill you. You get into an interview, you start to be asked questions, and you want to give the right answer, and the job is very important to you, and you really want to get that job, or at least move on to the next step in the interview process. And we kind of go dead. Human beings do their best work when they're operating outside their own personal psychology. In other words, when they're not thinking about themselves. Now, think about yourself in a social situation, one that is very comfortable to you. It might be with friends, it might be with family. You're having a good time. If you're having a good time, you're not thinking about yourself. You're just right in the experience with everybody else, but you're not questioning yourself and thinking about yourself. If you do that, you're going to start having a bad time. It's just that simple.
Yeah.
So when you start to get ready for that interview process, you have to understand that thinking about yourself is doing yourself a lot of damage. It's just getting in your own way.
Mm.
And a lot of doing a good interview is being able to get out of your own way.
Yeah, absolutely. And frankly, that's, I mean, back to overthinking, right? Like that we're literally putting complications in our own path.
We are. And a thing that's kind of good to understand is that all thought is completely neutral. There is no such thing as a good thought or a bad thought or a safe thought or a dangerous thought. It's all just thought, electrical impulses, in other words.
Mm.
It becomes an obstacle when we decide to assign significance to a particular thing. Oh, this interview is so important, I can't possibly screw this up. I've got every word's got to be right. Everything I do has got to be right. No, it doesn't. Because that person who's interviewing is probably, if it's a place you want to work, they're probably much more interested in seeing a human being than seeing you give every answer right. Because I've interviewed people like that. They got every answer right. I have no idea who this person is because they didn't show me. They were too busy trying to defend themselves and protect themselves against what I do know. They're trying to protect themselves against their own fear.
Right.
And you don't need protection from your own fear. You just have to be able to see what it is.
Wow, that's great advice. One of the things that one of the bullet points here, start contributing. I think that there's an interesting opportunity, especially when you've identified and are comfortable with that unique value, to bring it to the table early, and to actually start contributing value one way or the other within the interview process, so that relationship isn't based on a yes or no, but based on your comfort with the experience, the knowledge this organization needs in order to take the next step.
Sure, and it's an example of you letting the interviewer see you think in real time.
Mm.
So of course, if you're going to go for a job interview, I'm sure you've done your research and you have an idea of where that company is, and you might even have an idea of where they're trying to go. If you can bring your own experience to that conversation. I noticed that you're trying to grow your company by 50% in a year. Whatever the thing is,
Mhm.
you have some experience with it, or you have some thoughts about it. You can at least ask questions and say, I'm just curious, have you thought of looking at this?
Right.
So it's not you're asking them to share their thinking process with you. You're not saying, hey, I am, I'm the expert, I'll come in and solve all your problems. You're essentially saying, let's connect to the issues of your company and see where we can go with them. I have a few thoughts about it based on my own unique experience.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's such a great opportunity. And frankly, I've used it, and it's successful. I, you know, have on multiple times gone into interviews with the assumption we're already working together. We're
Yeah,
just getting to know each other a little bit more and figuring out what those exact issues are that we're working on, but we're already on the same team. So let's talk about how we be successful as a team, or how I can contribute to the team based on that unique experience.
yeah, yeah. And that's when an interview is like a first date with somebody. That's you kind of want to see, well, gee, is there something going on between us? Am I comfortable with this person? What do I like about them? Um, Gee, I see a lot of things I like. This is great. I want to know more. I want to know more. And sometimes this is from memory because I've been married for an awfully long time, but sometimes you'll start to go on a date and it seems like a disaster from the beginning.
Mm.
And it's clear that this probably is not going to be a real comfortable thing or something that you necessarily want to pursue. It's good to know that right up front.
Sure. Sure. And back to the earlier idea that the more often you do this, the quicker, easier it is to realize when something is a good fit or isn't a good fit,
Oh,
and when you should
absolutely.
contribute value or not.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. My wife and I have any number of friends who are single, and we look at what they have to go through in terms of dating now. It's a lot more complicated than it was when we were young and dating and stuff. And I just think, oh God, I'm glad I don't have to go through that. That looks really, really hard. But of course, if I'd been going on dates all these years, if I hadn't been married and was going on dates all these years, the idea of a date wouldn't seem intimidating to me.
Right.
It was just, oh, here's one more date.
Right.
Just, here's one more job interview. Let's see what I can learn from this one. And you can always learn something from every single interview you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And every single interaction you have. And I think that's a great point, because, um, you can always contribute, and you can always learn.
Yeah, you sure can.
So obviously this is, we're talking about individual journeys, and really only you know the costs, or the effort, or the path that it took to get where you are, right? So everybody ultimately is negotiating their own journey in, when we're talking about this next step of salary negotiations. Um, so we certainly want to make sure that we're feathering in and valuing that experience, uh, in order to make sure we're building a relationship, starting a relationship, on footing that doesn't put us at a disadvantage.
Yeah, and a lot of job interviews sort of break down around the negotiation thing. And what Josh was saying earlier about this being kind of the best time ever in my lifetime
Mm.
to be looking for a job, because there are more jobs than there are people to fill them. You have to know that that puts you in a very strong position. Uh, and I mean, the strength of that position can't be overstated. It puts you just where you want to be. But if you're in a negotiation and you underestimate what you're worth,
Mm.
what tends to happen, or what can very easily happen, is the interviewer, or whoever you're at that point, it's not just the initial interviewer, it's probably somebody else when you're doing your negotiation. They can get a signal that, oh, wait a minute, this person doesn't know what they're worth. Well, back to dating as an analogy, if you start to go out with somebody and they don't know what they're worth, they don't understand their value, it kind of dooms the relationship,
Mm.
you know? if they don't know what they have to bring to a relationship.
Yeah.
And if you know what you have to bring to a job, you can't be afraid of saying, this is the amount of value I deliver, and this is what I need in return.
Mm.
And remember, negotiation means back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it's probably going to go back and forth a lot. That's just fine. Don't ever worry about that. If the negotiation seems to take a while, that's an advantage for you.
You said something to me in one of our conversations, something along the line of, the value I bring requires this. Like, that's the positioning you want to put into this part of the journey, right? Like, I know my value, and in order to obtain that value, these are the things that are important to me. And that may be, obviously salary is a piece of that, but it can be other expectations too. Back to the point about the shift in the marketplace, driving new and different benefits, remote work, family leave, diversity policies within organizations. And so I think that those are the types of things that you also have the ability to impact beyond your salary. You can help to start set a new or a different standard within that organization, within the industry, by leveraging your talent with some expectation of delivery on the other side.
Absolutely. And if they're not willing to uh, come to a settlement that's going to make you feel good about working there, don't take it.
Mm.
Don't take the job. When
Especially
you do,
now
walk
when
away.
there's two
Yeah.
people for every job that's open.
Yeah. Yeah. You mean two jobs for every.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Two jobs for every.
Right. Yeah,
um, per-
absolutely.
yeah, exactly.
You can walk away from a job, and sometimes you look more desirable if you do. And sometimes they'll come back to you and say, well, we found that extra $100,000 you wanted, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
We're willing to get on board because they know that you know what you're worth.
Yeah. And that comes back to the know the industry, the research the employer, right? If you know what standardized salaries are in your industry, in your region, then you have a lot more information going in. If you have also then tied an understanding to your unique value, it starts to to put a foundation under your compensation expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. But if they don't know what you're worth, if they see that you don't know what you're worth, they're not going to make it up for themselves. So they're going to think that you're worth less than you are.
Absolutely. Wow, this is great, Gary. Thank you so much. I think we're come to the end of our time, and at least our slides. We're certainly happy to take any questions or feedback. Want to make sure you do get the opportunity to visit Gary's website. And of course, if you're interested in learning more about WebScribble, you can check out ours as well. Nicole, do we have any questions?
None that I see right now. Does anybody have any questions for either Josh and or Gary? Thank you both for this very insightful conversation. I know I learned a lot from it, and hopefully this will be a very valuable resource for job seekers and association members to use in the future. So thank you both so much, and thank you everyone for your time today, and I'll let you guys wrap it up, but thank you so much.
Great. Thank you again, Gary. I love hearing your insights, and your path forward has certainly helped clarify and simplify my own. So hopefully others are able to take that from you as well. Again, thank you so much.
You're so welcome, and I'm thank you for those nice words. I appreciate that.
Great. We'll talk soon.
Sounds great.
Bye, everybody. Thank you very much.